All right, let's just jump right in. Now, I know that title is designed to grab your attention, but the science and history behind it are honestly, they're just fascinating. We're about to go on a journey that connects a 1,400-year-old religious rule with some of the absolute latest discoveries in microbiology and public health.
I don't think it's a sin to eat pork or shellfish. So I want to be super clear about that. But I don't think it's healthy. Statistically, by far, the #1 food on the planet that people eat that has parasites is pigs.
100%.
It's not even close. People might say, well, if you cook it, it'll kill the parasites. Okay, it'll kill a lot of them. But I don't know and believe that it actually kills all of them in most cases. I'll tell you a quick story. My cousin is a hunter, and he went and killed a wild boar. So it was completely wild, okay? It wasn't a farm-raised pig. It was a wild boar. He took it home, froze it, started eating it for breakfast a lot of days, and really cooked it really well in oil. About a month later, he's walking around the house with his shirt off, and I'm like, hey, what's on your back? And he had these yellow lesions all on his back. He literally had a parasitic infection. It was coming out on his skin. He started getting all these swells and sores.
Oh, wow.
Then had major digestive issues. All that being said, pork is the dirtiest land animal. It's toxic. And there's other reasons. They don't have sweat glands. They only have one digestive chamber versus cows and other animals have multi-chamber. So they're just not as good as detoxing. It takes cows like 24 hours to digest. It takes pigs 4 hours. It's actually kind of similar to the human system. And then shrimp, a very similar thing, or shellfish.
And really, this is the big question, isn't it? Was this ancient ban on pork just a cultural quirk, something based on superstition? Or was there something else going on? A kind of ancient wisdom, maybe? A biohazard warning system that was centuries, literally centuries, ahead of its time? As you're about to see, the answer is way more complex and way more interesting than you might think. So, to really get this, we have to start with the puzzle itself. We are talking about a rule so fundamental, it has shaped the diets and cultures of millions of people for millennia. And it's a rule that modern science is only now really starting to understand from a public health point of view. Yeah, see, this prohibition wasn't just some casual suggestion. It's a cornerstone of Islamic dietary law, and it shows up in 4 different chapters of the Qur'an. This was an absolute, non-negotiable command, laid down in the 7th century. The only time it was okay was in a life-or-death situation like starvation, which tells you just how serious the inherent risk was considered to be. Okay, so this word biohazard, it's a modern word, right? We're kind of looking back in time with our modern scientific goggles on. A biohazard is any biological thing that's a threat to living organisms. So the question becomes, did pork, especially back then before refrigeration and modern farming, actually fit this very modern definition? So let's get into the first big piece of the scientific puzzle. For centuries, nobody really knew the why behind the ban. But then, in the 19th century, the microscope was invented, and suddenly science started to catch up. It revealed this whole invisible world of invaders, hiding right there in the meat itself. This is where it gets kind of mind-blowing. Check out the dates. The religious law was established around 632 CE. Science didn't discover the first major culprit, this nasty little parasite called Trichinella spiralis, until 1835. That is a gap of more than 1,200 years. It took even longer to connect it to pigs and figure out how it worked. It's a staggering chronological paradox. A solution existed for 12 centuries before science even knew what the problem was. And these were the main microscopic bad guys. Scientists even have a nickname for them. The unholy trinity of pork parasites. Sounds serious, right? You've got Trichinella, which causes a horrible disease called trichinosis. Then there's Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm. And finally, Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite that's especially dangerous for pregnant women and their unborn children. And the tapeworm. Wow, this wasn't just about getting a stomachache. The larvae of this thing could actually travel to your brain. It causes a condition called neurocystic psychosis, which is a leading cause of epilepsy worldwide. Now, imagine you're living in the ancient world. You've got no idea what's going on, and suddenly people in your community start having seizures. It would look like some kind of madness or a divine curse, which would only reinforce the idea that this animal is fundamentally unclean. Okay, so you might think, parasites, we have microscopes, and good cooking now, problem solved. But nope. The story gets way more complicated. and in some ways, way more dangerous when we fast forward to the 21st century. Here's the key thing about pigs. Their biology is surprisingly similar to ours. This makes them the perfect zoonotic accelerator. Think of them as a biological mixing bowl, where viruses from other animals like birds or bats can mutate, adapt, and then make the jump to humans. They are, quite literally, a bridge for pandemics. And here's a perfect modern example. A big study in the Netherlands looked at blood donors for signs of hepatitis E, a liver virus that's super common in pigs. The results were, well, they were stark. Daily meat eaters had a 20.5% seroprevalence. Basically, 1 in 5 of them had been exposed to the virus. Compare that to just 12.4% for vegetarians. The data makes it pretty clear. Eating meat is a major risk factor here. And check this out. It's like a perfect real-world experiment happened on its own. A study in Thailand discovered that the lowest rates of hepatitis E in the entire country were found in the southern provinces. So what's special about those provinces? They're predominantly Muslim, which means, because of religious law, pork just isn't on the menu. The public health benefit is literally written on the map. And this brings us to the threats that are frankly the most terrifying. The ones you can't just cook away. We're now talking about dangers on a molecular level that have come directly from our modern factory farming methods. We're talking about a kind of hidden pandemic inside the pork supply itself. Just look at that number, 90%. By 2018, an absolutely staggering 90% of pig herds in Denmark, which is a huge pork producer, tested positive for a specific strain of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, a superbug. This isn't some minor issue. It's a massive, systemic crisis in modern pork production. So you're probably asking, how on earth does this happen? Well, it's a pretty scary chain of events. First, antibiotics are pumped into pigs on an industrial scale. This creates the perfect breeding ground for drug-resistant superbugs. Then, those superbugs can transfer to humans, either through the meat or just from contact. And finally, the manure from these farms gets used as fertilizer, spreading these resistance genes into the soil and onto other foods. It's a full-blown ecological nightmare. And it's not just bacteria. There's a chemical threat, too. Nasty things called dioxins. They're environmental poisons, and they're fat-soluble. That means they love to hang out and build up in fatty tissues. Because a pig has a high percentage of body fat, it's incredibly efficient at soaking up these toxins like a sponge. And when humans eat that pork, those toxins get stored in our bodies for years. But, the reasons for the ban probably weren't just about disease, even if that was the amazing side effect. To get the full picture, we have to zoom out a bit and look at some really powerful ecological and social reasons that just made the pig a bad fit for the ancient Middle East. This right here is the heart of what's called the pig dilemma. In a dry climate like the Middle East, animals like sheep and goats were perfect. They ate grass on land you couldn't farm, and they give you milk and wool in return. Pigs, though, they were a terrible deal. They ate the same grain and drank the same water that humans needed to survive, and they gave you nothing back except meat. Ecologically, they were a disaster waiting to happen. And then there's the human element, the us versus them. Food is a huge part of culture, right? So by saying, we do not eat pork, ancient communities like the Israelites created a super sharp, clear boundary between themselves and their neighbors. It turned a simple dietary rule into a powerful symbol of identity, which helped make sure the ban stuck around for thousands of years. So, parasites, viruses, superbugs, ecology, identity, we've covered a lot of ground, and it all brings us back to that one central question. Was all of this just one massive, incredibly layered coincidence? Or was there a kind of wisdom at play here, something that worked whether people understood the science behind it or not? I mean, when you just lay it all out like this, it's pretty incredible. One simple rule, don't eat pork, and it acts like this amazing 3-level defense system. First, it protected against the parasitic threats of the ancient world. Second, it provided a firewall against the viral zoonotic threats of the modern world. And third, it even protects against the invisible molecular threats like superbugs and chemical poisons that you can't even cook away. At the end of the day, this is the bottom line. It doesn't really matter if you think the rule came from God or just from clever human observation. The outcome, the functional outcome, is undeniable. It was an incredibly effective public health strategy that without a doubt reduced the amount of disease for any group of people that followed it. And that's what I want to leave you with. When an ancient piece of wisdom and our most up-to-date science point in the exact same direction so powerfully, what are we supposed to take away from that? It suggests that maybe, just maybe, there's a kind of profound, time-tested knowledge embedded in some old traditions that we're only now beginning to have the tools to fully understand.